The starship Aurora descended through the purple clouds of Vethra Prime, carrying the hopes of 8 billion human souls. Inside the diplomatic vessel, Ambassador Daniel Carter stood at the observation window, watching the alien world grow larger. Crystal towers rose from the planet's surface like frozen lightning, each one taller than any building ever constructed on Earth. This was the heart of galactic civilization, and humanity had finally been invited to speak. Daniel was 52 years old, with gray hair at his temples and calm brown eyes that had seen both war and peace. He had served 20 years in the Earth Navy before becoming a diplomat. He understood power, and he understood negotiation. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. "Ambassador, we are beginning our final approach," said Maria Lopez, his chief advisor. She was younger than Daniel, with sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. "The Concord representatives are already assembled in the Grand Chamber." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then let us not keep the masters of the galaxy waiting." The Grand Chamber of Vethra Prime was the largest enclosed space Daniel had ever seen. The ceiling rose so high that clouds actually formed near the top, drifting between massive pillars of living crystal. Thousands of alien beings filled the observation galleries, representing species from across the known universe. They had come to witness the youngest civilization in the galaxy make its case for membership. At the center of the chamber stood 12 thrones, each designed for a different biology. In these thrones sat the rulers of the Galactic Concord, the 12 ancient species that had controlled galactic affairs for over 10,000 years. Daniel recognized them from the intelligence briefings. The Keth were insectoid creatures with gleaming black shells and multifaceted eyes. The Moravians were beings of living crystal, their bodies humming with strange energies. The Sundari appeared as clouds of shimmering light, ancient beyond measure. The Voss were massive reptilian warriors, their scales the color of dried blood. And there were 8 others, each stranger than the last. High Arbiter Zilveth of the Keth Dominion rose from his throne. He was the leader of the Concord, chosen for his wisdom and his species' long history of galactic governance. His mandibles clicked as he spoke, and a translation device converted his words to English. "The Galactic Concord welcomes the representatives of Earth," Zilveth said. "You may present your petition." Daniel stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. He had practiced this speech 100 times. Every word had been chosen with care. "High Arbiter, honored rulers of the Concord," Daniel began. "Humanity comes before you today not as conquerors or beggars, but as equals seeking friendship. 40 years ago, we discovered faster than light travel. Since then, we've established colonies in 3 star systems. We have unified our world under a single government. We have put aside our old conflicts and turned our eyes toward the stars." He paused, looking at each of the 12 rulers in turn. "We ask only for fair treatment. We wish to trade with your civilizations, to learn from your wisdom, and to share our own unique perspective. We believe that humanity has much to offer the galactic community." Daniel presented their proposals: trade agreements that would benefit all parties, cultural exchange programs, scientific cooperation, mutual defense treaties. He spoke of Earth's history, its struggles and triumphs. He described humanity's resilience, their creativity, their determination to survive against all odds. When he finished, silence filled the Grand Chamber. Then High Arbiter Zilveth rose again. "The Concord has heard your petition," he said. "We have discussed humanity's place in the galaxy. We have reached a decision." Daniel felt hope rise in his chest. Perhaps they had seen reason. Perhaps they understood that humanity deserved respect. "Humanity will be granted protected species status," Zilveth announced. "You will not be conquered or enslaved. This is a great mercy, one that few young species receive." The hope in Daniel's chest began to curdle into something colder. In exchange for this protection, Zilveth continued, humanity will surrender all military vessels to Concord control. You will limit your expansion to your current 3 star systems. You will pay tribute in the form of rare minerals and labor as determined by the Concord. These terms are generous. In time, you will understand this. Daniel stood frozen. Around him, the alien observers murmured their approval. This was how things were done. Young species accepted the protection of the old. It had always been this way. Maria Lopez stepped close to Daniel and whispered, "Ambassador, we cannot accept these terms. This is slavery with a polite name." Daniel knew she was right. Humanity had not unified their world and reached for the stars just to become servants of alien masters. They had not survived world wars and climate catastrophe and nuclear terror just to hand over their future to creatures who saw them as children at best. He looked at High Arbiter Zilveth and asked a simple question. "And if we refuse?" The chamber went quiet. Then slowly the rulers of the Concord began to laugh. The Keth made clicking sounds that passed for amusement. The Voss hissed with contempt. The Moravians chimed like breaking glass. Even the ancient Sindari flickered with what could only be condescension. "Young species do not refuse," Zilveth said, as if explaining something to a foolish child. "You lack the understanding. You lack the power. You lack the wisdom to know what is best for you. Accept our terms, return to your worlds, and in a few centuries, you will thank us for our guidance." Daniel felt something change inside him. The hope was gone now, replaced by a cold and patient anger. He looked at Maria. She gave him the smallest of nods. "Then we have nothing more to discuss," Daniel said. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Humanity formally withdraws from these proceedings. We reject your terms. We reject your protection. We will forge our own path among the stars." He turned and walked toward the exit. His delegation followed in silence. Behind him, Zilveth called out, "You will return, human. When your colonies fail and your people starve, you will come crawling back to us. And our terms will be less generous then." Daniel did not turn around. He did not respond. He simply walked out of the grand chamber, out of the crystal towers of Vethra Prime, and back to his waiting ship. As the Aurora lifted off from the alien world, Maria Lopez watched Daniel staring out the observation window. "What do we do now?" she asked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hard as iron. "Now we go home," he said, "and we make sure that no one ever laughs at humanity again." The ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying with it the seeds of a war that would reshape the galaxy. On Vethra Prime, the rulers of the Concord returned to their business, confident that the foolish humans would soon come to their senses. They could not have been more wrong. The Galactic Concord had existed for 10,000 years. In that time, dozens of young species had emerged, been offered protection, and accepted their place in the natural order. The humans were just another example, a minor disturbance that would soon correct itself. The rulers of the Concord were certain that Earth would send new ambassadors within a decade, begging for the mercy they had foolishly rejected. But the humans did not come. On Vethra Prime, intelligence officers began to notice something strange. Human space had gone dark. The 3 colony worlds still existed. Their populations still lived and worked, but all external communications had stopped. Trade vessels that approached human borders were turned away. Diplomatic ships were escorted out of human territory by armed escorts. The humans were not dead, but they had vanished into themselves. "Perhaps they are ashamed," suggested the Voss representative during a Concord meeting. "They hide because they know they cannot face us." "Perhaps," said Kelmori of the Sindari, his form flickering with uncertainty. "Or perhaps they are preparing for something. High Arbiter Zilveth dismissed these concerns. Young species do not have the patience for long-term planning. The humans are simply isolating themselves while they come to terms with their situation. In another 5 years, hunger and desperation will drive them back to us. But Kelmori was not so certain. He had studied humanity's history, read their literature, analyze their patterns of behavior. Unlike most species, humans seem to grow stronger under pressure. Their history was filled with moments when they should have surrendered, but instead chose to fight against impossible odds. He kept his concerns to himself. The other rulers did not want to hear them. On Earth, a transformation was taking place. President Catherine Shaw stood before the United Earth Assembly, her voice carried across every screen on the planet. She was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that burned with determination. She had been elected 2 years after the failed peace talks, running on a single promise: humanity would never kneel. "The Concord believes we are weak," she said. "They believe we are children who will come crawling back when things get hard. They are wrong. For 5 years, we have worked in secret. For 5 years, we have sacrificed and struggled and built. Today, I am announcing the next phase of the Prometheus Doctrine." The Prometheus Doctrine was humanity's answer to the laughter of the Grand Chamber. Named after the mythological figure who stole fire from the gods, it was a plan to transform human civilization into something that could stand against the ancient powers of the galaxy. Admiral Christopher Blake oversaw the military portion of the doctrine. He was a tall man with a scarred face and cold blue eyes, a veteran of Earth's last great war before unification. Under his command, the old human fleet was completely dismantled. Every ship, every weapon, every piece of technology was taken apart and studied. "We cannot beat the Concord by building copies of their ships," Blake told his officers. "We must build something new, something they cannot predict or counter." Human engineers worked around the clock, designing vessels unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were smaller than Concord warships, faster, more maneuverable. They carried weapon systems that specifically targeted the weaknesses of each Concord species. The Keth relied on electromagnetic shields, so humans developed weapons that bypassed them entirely. The Voss used massive armor plating, so humans designed cutting beams that could slice through any known material. Dr. Samantha Price led the scientific research at the Copernicus station on Luna. She was brilliant and driven, a physicist who had given up a comfortable academic career to serve humanity's future. Her team worked on projects that would have seemed like magic just a decade before. "The Concord has had 10,000 years to develop their technology," she told her researchers. "We have had 40. But we have something they do not have: motivation. Every person on this station knows what is at stake. Every person here remembers the laughter. They made breakthrough after breakthrough. New shield harmonics that could block Concord weapons. Propulsion systems that allowed human ships to outrun anything in the galaxy. Communication arrays that could not be intercepted or decoded. And weapons, terrible weapons that would make the ancient powers of the Concord tremble. But perhaps the most important work was happening in the intelligence divisions. Commander Nathan Gray ran the Office of Strategic Intelligence, a network of spies and analysts dedicated to learning everything possible about the Concord. Human agents, disguised as members of other species, infiltrated Concord space. They gathered data on military capabilities, political alliances, economic systems, and cultural weaknesses. "The Concord is not as unified as it appears," Gray reported to President Shaw. "The 12 ruling species have been competing with each other for millennia. They cooperate only because the alternative is worse. If we can exploit those divisions, we can weaken them without firing a shot." Human psychologists studied the mindset of each Concord species. They learned what motivated them, what frightened them, what made them angry. They mapped out their decision-making processes and identified their blind spots. They all share one common assumption, Gray explained. They believe that older civilizations are naturally superior to younger ones. They cannot imagine a scenario where a species that discovered space travel only 40 years ago could pose a genuine threat. This arrogance is their greatest weakness. On the colony worlds, the human population grew rapidly. New cities rose from alien soil, filled with people who had been born under foreign suns, but who still called themselves human. These colonists worked harder than anyone had worked before, knowing that their labor was building the foundation of humanity's future. Children grew up hearing stories about the Grand Chamber, about the rulers who had laughed at their species. These stories became part of human culture, passed down from parent to child. The humiliation became a shared memory, a wound that united billions of people across 3 star systems. And through it all, humanity maintained its silence. On Vethra Prime, Kelmori of the Sindari watched the darkness of human space with growing unease. 10 years had passed since the failed peace talks. 10 years of silence. 10 years of waiting. We should send a reconnaissance fleet, he suggested during a Concord meeting, just to observe what the humans are doing. Waste of resources, growled the Voss representative. If the mammals want to hide in their little corner of the galaxy, let them. They are no threat to us. I am not so certain, Kelmori said. No species in our history has ever rejected Concord terms. No species has ever gone silent for this long. Something is happening in human space, and I believe we should know what it is. High Arbiter Zilvith considered this, then shook his head. The humans are irrelevant. They have 3 systems and a handful of primitive ships. Even if they have been building weapons, they cannot match our combined military strength. Let them play their games. When they are ready to accept reality, they will contact us. Kelmori wanted to argue, but he knew it was useless. The Concord had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They could not imagine a future where that was no longer true. But Kelmori could imagine it. Late at night, when his form dimmed with troubled thoughts, he could see the shape of things to come. He could feel the gathering storm. And he knew, with terrible certainty, that the galaxy was about to change forever. Warlord Sithax of the Voss Imperium was not a patient creature. For 10 years, he had watched the human systems with hungry eyes. 3 worlds, rich with resources, defended by a primitive species that had rejected the Concord's protection. In Voss culture, such weakness was an invitation. Such foolishness deserved to be punished. Sithax had finally convinced the Imperium Council to approve a conquest fleet. 200 warships, crewed by the finest warriors of the Voss, armed with weapons that had crushed a dozen species throughout history. It was more than enough to bring the humans to their knees. We will take their garden world first, Sithax told his officers as the fleet gathered at the border of human space. New Eden, they call it. Once we control it, the other colonies will surrender. The humans will become our slaves, and the Concord will see that the Voss are still the greatest warriors in the galaxy. His officers roared their approval. Victory was certain. Glory was assured. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, eager for conquest. In the human colony of New Eden, life continued as normal. Farmers worked in the fields, children played in the parks, and families gathered for evening meals. They knew a war was coming someday. They had prepared for it. But on this particular day, the sun was warm, the air was sweet, and the future seemed very far away. Commander Lisa Grant sat in the command chair of the Defiance, a small vessel orbiting high above New Eden. She was 34 years old, with short brown hair and steady gray eyes. She had been born on Earth, but had spent most of her life in space, training for a battle that everyone knew was coming. Commander, we have contacts emerging from hyperspace, reported her tactical officer. multiple signatures, counting. 200 vessels. Voss design. Lisa felt her heart rate increase, but her voice remained calm. All hands to battle stations. Send the alert to command. And get me a visual. The main screen flickered, then showed the Voss fleet in all its terrible glory. 200 warships, each one massive and bristling with weapons. They moved in perfect formation, advancing toward New Eden like a swarm of metal predators. Lisa studied the display for a moment, then nodded to herself. This was the moment they had trained for. This was why humanity had spent 10 years in silence. Open a channel to the Voss flagship, she ordered. The screen changed, showing the bridge of the lead Voss vessel. Warlord Sithax stared at her with reptilian eyes, his scales rippling with amusement. I am Warlord Sithax of the Voss Imperium, he growled. I claim this world in the name of the Imperium. Surrender your vessel and your colony, and I may allow some of your people to live. Lisa smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Voss fleet, you have entered sovereign human territory without authorization, she said, her voice calm and clear. You have 60 seconds to reverse course and withdraw. This is your only warning. Sithax stared at her. Then he began to laugh, a deep hissing sound that echoed through his bridge. His officers joined in, their amusement genuine and complete. One small ship threatens 200 warriors of the Voss, Sithax said, still laughing. Little mammal, your species rejected the Concord's protection. You have no allies. You have no hope. Surrender now, or I will destroy you and everyone on that world below. Lisa checked her tactical display. The 60 seconds were almost up. Your time is up, Warlord, she said. Remember that we gave you a chance. She cut the channel and turned to her weapons officer. Begin the harpoon sequence. The Defiance was small, but it carried weapons that had never been used in galactic warfare. The harpoon system was humanity's answer to the Concord's numerical advantage. Hundreds of autonomous missiles, each one powered by a tiny antimatter core, each one guided by an artificial intelligence that could adapt to any defensive system. The launch bays opened, and the harpoons streamed out into space. On the Voss flagship, alarm systems began screaming. Multiple contacts, shouted the tactical officer. Hundreds of them. They are moving too fast. Our targeting systems cannot track them. Sithax stared at his display, his amusement fading into confusion. The human weapons were spreading out, each one targeting a different Voss ship. They moved with impossible speed, weaving through the fleet's defensive fire like living things. All ships, evasive action. Sithax commanded. Destroy those weapons. But it was already too late. The first wave of harpoons hit their targets, and 47 Voss warships died in a single moment. The antimatter payloads burned through shields designed to stop plasma beams and kinetic rounds. Massive vessels, each one the pride of the Voss Imperium, became expanding clouds of debris and fire. The second wave launched. Then a third. The Defiance danced through the chaos, its engines pushing it to speeds that should have been impossible. Voss weapons fire tracked the small human vessel, but the ship moved too fast, changed direction too quickly. Every shot missed. Lisa watched her display with cold satisfaction. The harpoons were working exactly as designed. Each one was finding its target, adapting to the Voss defensive systems, striking at weak points that human intelligence had identified years before. Warlord, we must retreat, shouted the tactical officer on the Voss flagship. We have lost over 100 ships. Our formation is broken. Sithax could not believe what he was seeing. 200 ships, reduced to chaos by a single enemy vessel. This was impossible. This was madness. No, he growled. We are Voss. We do not flee from. A harpoon struck his ship, and Warlord Sithix died in fire. The battle lasted 23 minutes. When it ended, only 31 Voss ships remained, fleeing toward hyperspace with all possible speed. The rest were debris, floating in the darkness between stars. Commander Lisa Grant surveyed the wreckage, her face expressionless. Then she opened a channel to the retreating Voss vessels. "This message is for the Galactic Concord," she said, her voice steady. "Humanity is no longer asking for a seat at your table. We have built our own. Any further incursions into human space will be met with the same response. The next fleet will not have survivors to carry this message." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We remember the Grand Chamber," she continued. "We remember the laughter. You had your chance to treat us as equals. You chose to mock us instead. Now you will learn what that choice has cost you." She cut the transmission. On New Eden below, the people watched the battle's aftermath in stunned silence. They had known humanity was preparing for war. They had believed in the promise of the Prometheus doctrine. But to see it work, to watch 200 enemy warships destroyed by a single defender, it seemed like a dream. Commander Grant reported to Admiral Blake, who reported to President Shaw. The news spread across human space in hours. The first battle had been fought. The first victory had been won. On Vethra Prime, the 31 surviving Voss ships arrived with their terrible report. The rulers of the Concord listened in disbelief. 200 ships. 1 human vessel. 23 minutes. The laughter of the Grand Chamber was finally silenced. And in its place came something new. Fear. The Grand Chamber of Vethra Prime had not seen such chaos in 3,000 years. The 12 rulers of the Galactic Concord had gathered for an emergency session, their composure shattered by the news from human space. 200 Voss warships destroyed. 1 human vessel undamaged. The survivors' reports seemed impossible, but the evidence could not be denied. "This is a trick," insisted the Moravian delegate, his crystalline body pulsing with agitation. "The humans must have had hidden allies. Another power must have intervened on their behalf." "There was no other power," growled the new Voss representative, his predecessor having died with Warlord Sithix. "Our sensors detected only 1 human ship. Our warriors died fighting a single enemy." High Arbiter Zilveth stood at the center of the chamber, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled anxiety. For the first time in his long life, he did not know what to say. The natural order of the galaxy had been overturned. A young species, barely 40 years into spaceflight, had destroyed a Concord military force with casual ease. "We must respond with overwhelming force," said the Moravian delegate. "We will gather a combined fleet from all 12 civilizations. 1,000 ships. 2,000. However many it takes. We will crush the humans before they can threaten us further." "And if we lose that fleet as well?" asked Kalmori of the Sindari. His shimmering form was dim with worry. "We underestimated them once. We cannot afford to do so again. What would you have us do?" demanded the Voss representative. "Allow the humans to grow stronger? Wait until they come for us?" Kalmori flickered with frustration. "I would have us understand what we are facing before we send more of our people to die." Over the following weeks, the Concord's intelligence services worked frantically to penetrate human space. The reports they brought back were terrifying. Humanity had not been idle during their decade of silence. They had built a fleet of over 3,000 warships, each one more advanced than anything the Concord had ever produced. They had colonized 12 new worlds, expanding their population to nearly 20 billion. They had developed weapons specifically designed to counter each Concord species, exploiting weaknesses that had never before been tested. But the most frightening reports were about human psychology. "They are united by anger," reported the chief intelligence officer to the assembled rulers. Not anger at any specific wrong, but at the memory of humiliation. They remember this chamber. They remember being laughed at. They have transformed that memory into a driving purpose that motivates every aspect of their society. Anger fades, said Zilveth. In time, they will forget. No, said Kelmori. Humans do not forget. I have studied their history. They remember wrongs done to their ancestors centuries ago. They pass their grievances from generation to generation like sacred texts. We planted a seed of hatred in this chamber 10 years ago. Now we must harvest what is grown. On Earth, President Catherine Shaw addressed the United Earth Assembly for the final time. She was ending her second term, but her work was nearly complete. The Prometheus Doctrine has succeeded beyond our highest hopes, she said. We have built a military that can stand against the combined might of the Concord. We have developed technology that surpasses anything in the galaxy. We have proven that humanity cannot be conquered. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the assembled representatives. But we did not do this to become conquerors ourselves. We did this to ensure our freedom. Now that freedom is secure, we must decide what comes next. Do we hide behind our defenses and wait for the Concord to challenge us again? Or do we take the fight to them, not to destroy them, but to force them to accept a new reality? The vote was unanimous. Humanity would not wait. Admiral Christopher Blake launched Operation Reckoning 3 days later. Human fleets struck simultaneously at 17 strategic positions across Concord space. Military bases, shipyards, supply depots, and communication hubs were targeted with surgical precision. The attacks were designed to cripple the Concord's ability to wage war without causing unnecessary civilian casualties. The Concord's response was chaos. The 12 ruling species had never fought a coordinated war. They had never faced an enemy that understood their weaknesses so perfectly. Human ships appeared from hyperspace, struck their targets, and vanished before Concord defenders could respond. The attacks continued for weeks, never following a pattern that could be predicted. They know everything about us, the Moravian delegate said during an emergency session. They know our patrol routes, our defensive positions, our response times. They know the frequency of our communications and the harmonics of our shields. How is this possible? Kelmori answered quietly. They watched us. For 10 years, while we ignored them, they studied us. Every ship we sent to observe their space gave them information about our capabilities. Every diplomatic message we transmitted taught them about our technology. We gave them everything they needed to defeat us, and we never even noticed. The war lasted 18 months, but it was never really a contest. Human fleets destroyed Concord military assets with methodical efficiency. Admiral Blake commanded his forces like a master chess player, always 3 moves ahead of his opponents. The Concord tried to mount counterattacks, but every assault was predicted and countered. Ships that ventured into human space did not return. In the end, it was not a decisive battle that broke the Concord's will. It was exhaustion. Their economies were disrupted, their military was shattered, their populations were terrified. The 12 ruling species, who had cooperated for 10,000 years, began to blame each other for the disaster. President Catherine Shaw's successor, President Andrew Collins, sent a message to High Arbiter Zilveth. Humanity does not seek your destruction, the message read. We never wanted this war. We wanted only to be treated with respect, to be recognized as equals in the galactic community. You denied us that opportunity and laughed at our request. Now you have seen what that laughter has cost you. We are prepared to end this conflict. We are prepared to show mercy. But peace will be on our terms. The old order is finished. If you wish to survive, you will accept the new reality. Zilveth read the message in silence. Around him, the other rulers waited for his response. For 10,000 years, The Concord had dictated terms to lesser species. Now a species that had discovered spaceflight barely 50 years ago was dictating terms to them. "What choice do we have?" asked the Voss representative. "None," said Kelmori. "We have no choice at all." High Arbiter Zilveth bowed his head in acceptance. "Contact the humans," he said. "Tell them we will meet their representatives wherever they choose. Tell them we are prepared to discuss peace." The message was sent. Humanity had won. But the true victory would be decided not on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. And there, humanity would face its greatest test, the temptation to become the very thing they had fought against. The peace negotiations took place on Earth, in the ancient city of Geneva. Humanity had chosen this location with care. For centuries, Geneva had been a place where enemies came together to discuss peace. Treaties had been signed here that ended terrible wars. Agreements had been made here that protected the rights of all people. It seemed fitting that the future of the galaxy would be decided in the same halls. Kelmori of the Sundari led the Concord delegation. High Arbiter Zilveth had been removed from power, blamed for the disaster that had befallen the ancient civilizations. The other rulers had chosen Kelmori because he was the only one who had warned them about humanity. Perhaps they hoped he could salvage something from the wreckage. President Andrew Collins represented humanity. He was a younger man than his predecessor, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that had won him the trust of billions. Admiral Blake stood at his side, along with Maria Lopez and a very old Daniel Carter. Carter was 80 years old now, his hair white and his body frail. But his mind was still sharp, and his eyes still held the same calm determination that had carried him out of the Grand Chamber 15 years before. He had asked to be present at this moment. President Collins had agreed. The delegations met in a conference room overlooking the lake. Through the windows, snow-capped mountains rose against the blue sky. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day that seemed to promise new beginnings. Kelmori studied the humans across the table. He had spent years learning about their species, but this was his first time meeting them in person. They were smaller than most Concord species, physically weak by galactic standards. And yet they had brought the ancient powers of the galaxy to their knees. "I must ask a question before we begin," Kelmori said, his form flickering with genuine curiosity. "You have won, completely and absolutely. You could demand anything from us. You could take our worlds, enslave our populations, destroy our civilizations. Why are you offering peace instead?" President Collins considered the question carefully before answering. "Because we remember what it felt like to be powerless," he said. "We remember standing in the Grand Chamber, hoping for respect and receiving mockery. We remember being told that we did not matter, that our dreams and aspirations were worth nothing." He paused, looking at each member of the Concord delegation in turn. "We could become the thing we hated," he continued. "We could use our power to dominate and humiliate. But what would that make us? Just another empire, ruling through fear instead of force. That is not what we want. That is not why we fought. Then what do you want?" asked Kelmori. "We want what we asked for 15 years ago," said Maria Lopez. She had aged as well, but her intelligence was undiminished. "We want respect. We want equality. We want to be treated as partners, not as subjects." The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. The terms were surprisingly generous. Humanity demanded no tribute, no territory beyond what they already controlled, no subjugation of Concord species. They asked only for the dissolution of the old order and the creation of something new. The Galactic Concord would be replaced by the Interstellar Commonwealth. Every species, whether ancient or young, would have an equal voice in this new government. Decisions would be made through consensus rather than dictation. Military forces would be used only for defense, never for conquest. Kelmori listened to these proposals with growing amazement. The humans had the power to demand anything, and they were asking only for fairness. "You could take everything," he said to President Collins during a private meeting. "Your military is stronger than our combined forces. Your technology is superior. You could rule the galaxy as absolute masters. Why would you give that up?" Collins smiled sadly. "Because power without wisdom is just tyranny with better weapons. We saw what the Concord became over 10,000 years. You stopped growing, stopped learning, stopped caring about anyone but yourselves. If we follow the same path, we will end up in the same place. You believe you are better than us?" Kelmori asked, his form flickering with what might have been offense. "No," Collins said. "We believe we can learn from your mistakes." That is not the same thing. The treaty was signed on a bright spring morning. Representatives of all 12 Concord species added their marks to the document, alongside the signatures of human leaders. The Galactic Concord officially ceased to exist. The Interstellar Commonwealth was born. In the years that followed, the galaxy began to change. Humanity shared its technology freely, helping other species advance without demanding payment or submission. They advocated for the rights of young civilizations, ensuring that no species would ever face the mockery that humans had endured in the Grand Chamber. The former rulers of the Concord adapted slowly to the new reality. Some embraced the change, grateful for a second chance. Others struggled with their loss of status, unable to accept a galaxy where their ancient wisdom was no longer law. Kelmori became one of humanity's closest allies. He spent years studying human culture, trying to understand how such a young species could show such mercy to those who had wronged them. "It is not mercy," Daniel Carter explained to him not long before his death. "It is practicality. Hatred takes energy. Revenge takes resources. We spent 10 years feeding our anger, and it made us strong. But we could not feed it forever. Eventually, we had to choose between destruction and creation. And you chose creation," Kelmori said. "We chose the future," Carter replied. "The past cannot be changed." The Concord laughed at us, and we used that laughter as fuel. But fuel burns out. What matters is what you build with the heat. Daniel Carter died peacefully at the age of 93, surrounded by family and friends. He was buried on Earth, in a small cemetery near the village where he had been born. His grave was simple, marked only by his name and 2 dates. But across the galaxy, he was remembered as the man who walked out of the Grand Chamber, the man who chose dignity over submission, the man whose quiet courage had changed everything. At his memorial service, President Collins spoke of Carter's legacy. "Daniel Carter did not fire a single shot in our war with the Concord," he said. "He was not a soldier or a scientist or an engineer. He was a diplomat, a man who believed that words could be as powerful as weapons. When the Concord offered us slavery dressed as protection, he said no. When they laughed at our dreams, he walked away. And by walking away, he gave us the strength to stand." The memorial was attended by representatives of every species in the Commonwealth. They had come to honor a human who had been dead for 15 years by the time most of them were born. They had come because his story had become their story, a reminder that courage could come from the most unlikely places. That evening, as the stars emerged over Geneva, a Sindari representative approached Maria Lopez. She was very old now, the last surviving member of the original diplomatic team. "I have always wondered something," the Sindari said. "When Ambassador Carter walked out of the Grand Chamber, was he frightened?" Maria smiled, remembering that long-ago day. "Terrified," she said. "We all were. We had no idea if humanity could survive without the Concord's protection. We had no guarantee that our plan would work. Then why did you do it? Maria looked up at the stars, countless points of light representing worlds that now lived in peace. Because some things are worth the risk, she said. Because there are moments when you have to choose between safety and dignity. Because someone, somewhere, has to be the first to say no. She paused, her eyes bright with memories. And because, she added with a small smile, humans take things personally. Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the struggles of the creatures below. But on 1,000 worlds, the story of humanity's stand would be told for generations to come. A reminder that courage could change everything. A warning to never underestimate those who refuse to kneel. And in the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not their technology or their weapons, but the simple truth that dignity was worth fighting for.